You're listening to the Run for Your Lives podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Daphne.
And I'm Pake.
And this is the Run for Your Lives podcast.
This episode is the 2004 apocalyptic disaster film, The Day After Tomorrow, directed by Roland Emmerich and released on May 28th, 2004.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to this one. It's been one of my favorite effect films for such a long time since it came out. So I'm really excited to dive in and see where our opinions and thoughts take us on this one.
Yeah, it's one that I haven't seen since it first came out, so it's been a long time. I haven't gone back and rewatched it, even though I do remember pretty fondly, like, enjoying it while watching it that first time. And so I didn't remember a whole lot about it, so it was fun to revisit and kind of be surprised or see things again for, you know, it'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't know that was going to happen this time. So that's always cool. It hits a little close to home. Sort of, because I'm like, even, you know, so many years later, it's like we're still dealing with the same, like, possibilities of climate change. I mean, not necessarily this drastic, necessarily. On the science, you know, basis of this movie, it takes a lot of liberties, but the, you know, the importance of climate change and us, you know, doing the best to combat that, we're still dealing with those things all these years later, and there's still so many people that are ignoring it or pretending it's not real or a hoax or whatever, which is insane. And I hope we don't come across with, like, too political in this, you know, in this recording, this podcast, because that's not what we're trying to do. But at the same time, if I'm going to be real frank with you, like, it's not a political topic. It shouldn't be, at least, but people make it that way sometimes. I don't understand why, because it's not politics. It's science, and science deals with facts and facts only. Doesn't care what your political leanings are. So.
Exactly. And, you know, it's science, it's human. It's being a good human. It's taking care of not only ourselves, but our planet, and making sure that the planet is still here for all the generations to come. And I think that's something that we all need to take very seriously. And so I think we should just dive into this. Yeah. And see where we go.
All right.
All right. So, The Day After Tomorrow, as you mentioned, was directed by Roland Emmerich. He brought us some other amazing disaster or apocalyptic type films, including Independence Day and the subsequent sequel, and 2012. Which are two that I really enjoy. So it doesn't surprise me that he also directed those as well. Yeah. It stars Dennis Quaid, Jake Gyllenhaal, Ian Holm, Emmy Rossum, and Celia Ward. Was filmed on location in Toronto and Montreal. And it was inspired by the book The Coming Global Superstorm by Art Bell and Whitley Strieber. And Strieber also wrote the derivative novel from the film. So that's out there. She did the novelization. Cool. The budget was $125 million, and the worldwide gross was $552.6 million. It was the sixth highest grossing film of 2004, and it clocks in at 123 minutes, so just over 2 hours. Mm-hmm. So, Peg, why don't you give us a synopsis of The Day After Tomorrow?
All right. In The Day After Tomorrow, Jack Hall, paleoclimatologist, must make a daring trek from Washington, D.C. to New York City to reach his son, trapped in the crosshairs of a sudden international storm which plunges the planet into a new ice age.
That it does.
It's Ice Age 2, but this time without a goofy cartoon squirrel.
Exactly. So if you took your kids to see this one instead, oops, sorry. Yep. Not really what you were expecting. I really like this film. I've seen it a bunch of times. But I found in looking at it with a different lens, like for this podcast,
Yeah.
I looked at it a different way. And I came out the other side, maybe not in the same place I was when I started.
Okay.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing our discussion on it, to see where we land at the end with the rankings, and also all the little pieces in between that we're going to talk about.
All right. Well, cool. Then I guess we should go ahead and get on to it. And so we'll kind of talk topic to topic. And I think the best place to start is the driving force of this movie, which is climate change and the climate change crisis. And like I mentioned earlier, this conversation is still going on today. And it's said in so many of the same ways. You hear a lot of the same things come up, like, oh, so much for global warming because we're reaching record low temperatures and things are freezing. So I thought you said it was warming. And it's just like, which is why, since this movie was released, the term has shifted a lot more towards saying climate change and the climate change crisis versus global warming for that reason,
yes.
Because certain concepts are just too hard for some people. I guess, is that too harsh for me to say? Probably. I don't know.
No,
but
I think it's realistic. Yeah. I think it's a realistic statement.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
And then, in other ways, it sounds just so much like life right now, with the vice president in this movie being just like, the economy is just as fragile as the climate. And it's like, sure. But if all of the humans die out or we don't have a survivable planet, then what good is a freaking economy?
Exactly. Yeah, agreed. That was one line that when it came out of his mouth, it really resonated with me, just basically for current life.
Yeah.
And it reminded me, watching this movie, about how things have not really changed.
Yeah.
In the last 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sad, because I feel like we have grown as a country, or worldwide. I feel like people have really grown as humans, and the fact that we're still not able to get through and better understand how our actions affect the climate, affect the world, and could be detrimental for future generations. I think we need to take a closer look at ourselves and
absolutely
putting others ahead of us by protecting this planet better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've got my my shirt on today that just starts off with "Science is real." Listen to your scientists, people. Oh.
I highly approve of that t-shirt.
I know, because we get this, the whole first half of this movie is we just get yet another very well studied and well educated scientist being ignored. And it's like, we just recently with Dante's Peak covered this. Is like, this is a bad idea. Stop ignoring your scientists, people.
Yeah. What does it take? Like, what does it take to really get through to people and get them to understand that this is a real crisis?
Yeah.
I mean, I think former Vice President Al Gore had a film come out. Was it An Inconvenient Truth?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's a 2006 American documentary film.
Yeah.
So that was a great film that focused on science and alerting the public to an increasing planetary emergency due to global warming, which we've just discussed is actually climate change.
Yeah.
And again, I'll ask the question, what does it take to make it real so that people will take a look at it and understand that life is not just about us. We might be the ones living now, but there are future generations that are going to need this planet to survive. And in order to do that, we need to start making at least small changes now.
Yeah. So in this film, we do see that, again, I mentioned, the science behind this film may not be very exact. I mean, the idea of climate change and it being catastrophic to the planet in the future is definitely 100% real. But necessarily how fast it took place and a lot of the things that happened are stretching the truth a little bit. And that's okay. But since we're here to talk about this movie and what happened in this movie, we're going to just act like, yep, these things are what's going to happen because that's what's happening in this movie. So let's talk about the effects that we see in The Day After Tomorrow thanks to this rapid climate change. And I noticed a lot of little effects. It starts small and then things grow from there. It starts small with things like it's snowing in New Delhi to you seeing this like massive hail falling in Tokyo and Los Angeles, and then hurricane after hurricane after hurricane, which does that sound familiar, people?
Yes. Yes.
Tornadoes in Los Angeles, below Antarctic temperatures happening in places like Scotland, where typically not that kind of weather at all. The complete flooding of New York City, things like that, where it just escalates over and over itself.
It's true, too. The water at one point, when New York City is starting to get slammed and we're getting that big wall of water, and you see that only a small part of the Statue of Liberty is still there that you can see, you realize that gives you like a cue as to how tall that water actually is that's coming in.
I've been in that water before myself. I mean, on a boat, not in the water, but I've been on the Hudson in a boat looking at the Statue of Liberty. I know what that looks like, and that's a lot of water.
Definitely is. There were a few other things, too, that they talked about in the movie, but we really didn't get to see, and one of them was a 25-foot water wall in Nova Scotia, which I think actually ended up in New York.
Yeah.
And a typhoon in Australia, which was not common. I remember, too, when the tornadoes hit Los Angeles, it was like, bye-bye Hollywood sign, there it goes. That quick, things were flying, and
it's erasing the Hollywood sign.
Fine, yeah. Lots of things were happening, and I think that you brought up some great points. I think those weather patterns really showed the urgency, and that they really could wreak havoc and create madness in the world. And, we've already touched on a little bit about how this ties to our current global climate crisis. So I think that it's easy to look at those things and think, oh my God, that could happen maybe.
Yeah, so. It creates worries that I never really even would have thought about. Like subway tunnels in New York City flooding.
Yeah.
I've been in the subway tunnels a few times.
Me too.
Like, I don't want that. Not at all. I've never even thought about them filling up with water, but that's not good. Or even more unrealistic, but who knows when you get these kind of things. It's these one of the main things in this movie is those storm systems. You get to like the eye of the storm, where I can't describe it as elegantly as Jack Hall does, but where like the air getting sucked down into the eye of that, which is these super cold, immediately freezing, super freezing temperatures that get, that work their way down through there to where helicopters are just like freezing and dropping out of the sky in midair.
That actually leads me to some of the things that I took away from this movie, and a lot of it tied around these views and visual effects, and what you just would see something and it hit you in a certain way, like, oh my God, that's just not something that you would see every day, and it's something that could happen, and you just realize just how realistic this could be. Maybe not, like you said, happening tomorrow, but over time, if our planet isn't better taken care of, we could see more of this.
Yeah.
And so, like near the beginning, when the janitor opens the door, and all of the floors are gone, and he sees all of the destruction from that viewpoint, and you're just looking at it like, wow, he's opening the door, not even realizing that he could take a step out and that would be it.
Yeah. It was a really cool visual. All the destruction there and the tornado just kind of moving off in the distance after it left this wake of destruction, all these buildings ripped into pieces.
Those tornadoes, too. There was one point where I think a news crew was covering tornadoes at the airport, and they all just started merging together into this big super tornado, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I feel like we're back at Twister again, and only this is 10 times worse. It's just so extreme. It just makes me wonder what Joe and Bill would think of that. Different movie, but similar story. Plot line.
These would not have been as fun to chase.
No, I don't know how you would have chased it. It definitely would have been a challenge. I also liked the choppers, and I believe they were going to get the royal family from in Scotland.
Yeah.
But their fuel lines all froze in the middle of the storm, but they were kind of in the eye. Like they were in this, they were flying, they had flown through part of the storm. They were kind of in the middle in the eye. And their fuel line starts freezing, and then they start crashing, and the guy opens the door after they've crashed, and you see his breath come out, and then his whole body just freezes.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone, I think it might have been Jack, said, fuel lines don't freeze unless it's like 150 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. And it actually might have been our good friend, Professor Robson, the Institute, that said that, but...
Yeah, so it had to at least be that cold.
Yes.
But then they froze so suddenly that it had to have definitely been much colder than even that.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like the cold front hit to freeze the lines, but then it dropped even more after that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was pretty incredible, I thought.
Yeah.
It was cool, too, to have the astronauts at the space station. They kept looking down at different weather patterns and getting to see the storm swirls and everything. They're reporting a 50 miles of vortex over New York, and just these cool, visuals that we got. Not necessarily effects, but like the visual piece of it.
Yeah, I have a whole list of my favorite cool visuals as part of my notes too. So I love that you have those. I'm trying to see if I have anything else that we really didn't talk about. Because I had the janitor with the door, had the Statue of Liberty, the eye of the storm, like we talked about, freezing the helicopters, but then also kind of when that one comes over New York, when Jack is finally reaching close to the library, and you see where the wind just stops and the flag falls flaccid, for lack of a better word. But just there's no wind, everything just droops down, and then the air starts coming down through that eye, and then you start seeing things freezing from the top down. Yeah. And as the wind kind of picks back up with things freezing, and that was a really cool effect. Even with the Statue of Liberty being completely frozen over, and you have Jack and Jason walking into Manhattan on top of just ice and snow, as they're just used to seeing Manhattan Island, and now they're just walking into the grid of buildings on top of the snow, which was cool.
Those ships, too, around the Statue of Liberty that were kind of damaged or broken or messed up in some way.
Speaking of ships, even before everything froze over, when it was still water, that visual of them being in the library and looking out the windows and seeing this Russian ghost ship basically just floating its way through the streets of New York. That's a really cool thing to see. Scary, spooky, but cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think it got caught on that bus, on a bus.
Yeah.
And it's why it finally stopped.
Mm-hmm.
When I was rewatching this time, I was noticing things I had never noticed before. And that was one of the things I'm like, it got stuck on the bus on the bottom. I didn't even remember that was why it stopped.
Yeah.
So, and that took me back to watching the bus when the businessmen get on the bus and the wall of water is coming. And then all of a sudden, you see the bus go flying and the water is filling the streets. And it was just crazy.
Yeah.
It just flew. And a minute ago, you had seen those businessmen get in there, and there was also that view where the bus driver was looking through his mirror, and behind him, he saw the water wall coming. And it was just like, oh my gosh, what would you do if you saw that? I mean, how would you react to that? It's like, you have split second that you have to make a decision.
Yeah. It's just at no point other than what Jack said about the people needing to just stay inside was his best advice to those people was just try to ride it out and pray. That's all you have. Good luck. You're not going to make it.
There was also, did you notice that the antenna, and I think it was meant to be the Empire State Building, where the antenna at the top of the building started to freeze, and then it came down, it just kept freezing, and then the windows started blowing out. And it was just oh my god.
It's this cool effect where you can almost see the air vortex moving down, because you can see the freezing moving down the buildings as windows are blowing out, getting closer and closer to ground level where Jack and Jason are. And you're just watching them try to beat the clock. And even like Sam and the other guys too, you kind of get to see both of those where they're both trying to beat the clock to get back into whatever buildings they're getting into as you're watching the freezing air working its
Oh,
way down.
yeah. Don't let the fire go out. Don't let the fire go out.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh my God. And with his dad, it was, he had to get the fire lit really quickly.
Yeah.
There was also this point where Jack and Jason are walking into Manhattan, but not quite there yet, and they pass by these frozen bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the people that left the library.
Yeah.
Officer Campbell, who dragged everyone out and said, we need to go. Him and all of the people just perished.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's another situation of people not listening.
Yeah. Which it's harder to be harder on them, because instead of listening to this like scientist who's talking directly to the president and vice president, it is this like 17-year-old kid being like, listen, True. I know what I'm talking about. My dad's a scientist. Like, okay, kid. So like, I kind of get that. But then at the same time, like they had a chance to turn back and didn't when they realized it was only getting colder.
Yeah. And he just kept them going. And I'm like, the weather, I mean, it seemed cold and snowy, and it's just not something you would normally go out in anyway.
Yeah.
However, it was just a situation that was 50-50. Like, what do you do? Do you go back? Do you go forward? What do you do? And when you have no one telling you what you should be doing, other than a 17-year-old boy.
Yeah. They had no service and stuff out there.
Then what do? You just keep going.
Yeah.
So I thought the views in this movie and the visuals were just so... Those were my favorite parts, because they told the story with no words.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great visual. And I guess if you're ready to move on to another topic, then since we were already talking about Sam and, him being in the library and telling those people to stay, I feel like if we want to move into characters, the best way to start, I think, is Sam for me, which is kind of funny because Jack seems to be the main character of this movie, but I was way more interested. In what was going on with Sam. So he's the one that I had to talk about the most. And I think, we see pretty like early on that he takes after his father a lot, as far as he's very smart. I just kind of have like Sam the genius written down here because, we started off seeing like, he flunked a test and we're like, oh, it leads you to think for a few minutes. It's like, oh, he's the, deadbeat son of the, highly respected scientist. And, oh man, he's this, rebel kid. And then immediately you see like, oh no, he's a straight A student, very smart. And so him flunking something seems weird. And then it's like, technically he got flunked because he's smarter than the teacher. And the teacher didn't believe that he could have figured that out without writing everything down. He couldn't have done it in his head because the teacher couldn't do it that way. So why would the student be able to?
There are some smart kids out there.
So he flunked you because you're smarter than him. He's like, yeah, that's what I told him too. Oh, how did he take that? Well, he flunked me, did he?
Yeah, I liked Sam as well. I thought that it was kind of interesting that he joined the decathlon team, not because he's super smart and wants to bring his school glory, but because of Laura.
He's just got a crush on a girl, and that's what's going to get him there.
So he joined because of her. And some of their interactions were so cute when she's trying to help him, when he's on the plane and he's scared and he grabs her hand, and then finally the turbulence stops and she's just like, can I have my hand back?
Yeah. And then after everything calms down, that's when the oxygen bags come down. Like, oh, thanks for that.
Yep.
Which I have no problems flying myself, but still that was really tense. I was like, I wouldn't want to be in that situation where it's that much turbulence.
No.
Like, that's too shaky.
I've had some rocky flights before because a lot of the planes that you take, a lot of the planes in Maine are smaller planes, like to Boston or even DC, and so we call them puddle jumpers, and they do feel it all. They feel every little bump in the air. But I don't think I've had anything quite as bad as that.
No.
So I can relate to that. But he was he's eating all these peanuts and snacks and just trying to keep himself from... I don't think he wants to look like he doesn't have it together.
Yeah.
But he's having a really hard time because he's terrified of being, on a plane. And I think it's funny that his father thought that it was funny that he was going on a plane, and then also that he joined a team, because I guess that's not really something that Sam would normally do.
Yeah.
And
I guess so, yeah.
We learned, too, that Laura has paid attention during health class, because when Sam is freezing from going down to use the payphones, she's trying to warm up his heart because the blood would rush too quickly and, his heart could stop. And he just seemed surprised that she knew this. And then she explained that, some of us paid attention during health class.
Mm-hmm. Which I was glad that he stayed in that freezing water until the very last second. Like, that was actually a really important thing, that he hung on to that phone call.
Yes.
As long as he possibly could, or else he wouldn't have known that they needed to stay inside, and they probably would have left with everybody else and died as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because there was nothing. I mean, where they were walking, there really wasn't any place for them to go where they could have, gotten away from the cold front.
Yeah.
They couldn't have rushed into a building that was available. There were no buildings.
Yeah.
They were just walking in a tundra.
It's a sad fate for all those people. And I feel like I'm glad that Sam didn't dwell on it. Like, you can tell that he was kind of down on himself when those people left, and it was sad. He felt bad for them leaving.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that it didn't haunt him for the rest of the movie, because I remember even saying to myself, like, out loud, watching the movie, being like, Sam, don't be hard on yourself. I was just like, you did what you could. Like, the people, the few people who did stay are going to be grateful for you trying.
Absolutely.
And then those that didn't listen, like, that's not on you. That's
no. They left.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the people that did stay were fighting over which books to burn.
Yeah.
But then I think it was Sam's friend that found the tax code books, and that seemed to not bother anyone.
Yeah, they're sitting over there like, you can't burn Friedrich Nietzsche. And he's just like, there's tax law books down here. Let's take care of those first. Nobody cares about that.
Yeah, exactly. It was so funny. Oh, so funny.
Brian is, he was just like the very nerdy, super smart guy out of that friend group.
Oh, yeah. He was making some funny comments about when they were at the party about I think he called everyone nerds. Like, he's like, we're all nerds, or everyone here is a nerd. And I'm just thinking, oh, yeah, so are you. You're friends. It's okay. Everyone's gets to be nerdy together.
Yeah. And then, you mentioned Laura a little bit, since I'm kind of just going through those characters that we see that, she didn't have a whole lot going on other than, she's the reason that Sam was there.
Yes.
And then we see that she has a good heart, as far as even with all this water rising, she turns back to help these, I guess it would have been like, African is what they kind of like, maybe like French Ghana or something.
Yeah.
These immigrants or whatever they are, these people, they had passports, so they were traveling, or, people in a foreign country. But they're only speaking French, and the police officers trying to help them out of the car can't communicate well. And I guess Laura does speak French, and so she was able to go back and translate for them and help them get out of the car, and even goes back to get the lady's bag and passports and stuff for her. So you see a good heart there, even though she ends up cutting her leg on that taxi underwater and catching the infection, which leads them to have to go to the boat to get
the ghost
penicillin for her. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I liked her because she was super smart. To me, they never said who the captain of the team was, but I think it was her. Like, she's the one deciding what answer to put down, and it's like, that's kind of what a captain would do. And I feel like she was super smart, and you could tell that it was driving Sam crazy when she went on the tour with, I think his name was JD. They went on the tour of the school together. And you could tell it was bothering him. Like, he's just like, he wanted to be, with her.
Oh, yeah. Had that immediate jealousy because JD was the captain of the other team, the only team that got that question correct. And so there's almost this little competition between them. And so, of course, now, we have to stay at his house and we have to like be with him and he's giving you a tour of their school. And so at first, speaking of JD, I guess get into that character a little bit, is at first like, he's going to be the typical rich kid douchebag, and it turned around. He actually ended up being a really cool guy. And,
he wasn't a jerk.
His background, this huge fancy mansion of a New York apartment, kind of thing. Is like, he's like, it's my dad's place. It's like, of course. But then he's like, yeah, but he's never here because he's always off with my stepmom. And the way he says it is almost like, I don't even know who this woman is. Like, so you see, he's got his own struggles and and he's a pretty down to earth guy, and he has a good relationship with his brother, which bothered me a lot because then they never went back to that because he said, we have to go to Philadelphia to get my little brother. And then at the end of the movie where they're being like, the helicopters are rescuing them after they survive, I was like, what about JD's little brother in Philadelphia? I guess we're just going to completely ignore that kid now. Cool.
all these loose ends. With movies like this, I always have those additional questions. Yeah. I'm like, but what about this? And you didn't go back for this. And, I want answers to those questions, and we never get them. Mm-hmm. It's like, come on, just, usually those questions for me revolve around a dog or a cat or something that's been left behind, and I want to know if it's okay. Yeah. But in this case, it's about JD's little brother, and I just want to know. It's
like, Philadelphia is still definitely above that line of safety. Philly still got hit pretty hard. I was like, what about this kid?
Is he okay? I mean, I don't know. I want to know.
Yeah.
I wish we could know, but I have this sneaking suspicion that no. Mm-hmm. We just have to accept that we're not going to know and move on, I guess.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
And then I loved Buddha, the dog. Speaking of, since you mentioned the dogs, like Luther, I think, is the guy who's the homeless man who owns him.
Yes.
He was cool and all, but like, the dog. I loved Buddha.
Buddha was great. And Luther did so much. Like, he couldn't go in the library at first because he had the dog with him. Mm-hmm. And he was just trying to keep the dog safe and keep himself safe. And you could tell, too, when the wall of water was coming, he picked Buddha up and they ran in the library. And they had all these little comedic moments, like, at one point, Buddha is barking, and Luther says, "Shh, you're not even supposed to be in here." Yeah, and it just made me laugh. And he gave him the last hot dog, and
it was a lot of fun. And I was really glad nothing bad happened to them because they were,
me too,
great.
I'm glad they stayed.
Yeah, and then we get the librarian who stays behind, which I guess according to the cast list and the credits, her character name was Judith, but they never really mentioned that. But the librarian, which I was like, why does she look so familiar? So I had to go look at it. It was like, it's Agnes from the Umbrella Academy, the lady from the donut shop, the diner.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Folks, if you don't know, Pake and I are big fans of the Umbrella Academy, and you may have heard his voice over on Strange Indeed, covering the Umbrella Academy with Rima for season 2. Mm-hmm. Wow, that is amazing. I did not know that.
Yep. I was like, why is she so familiar? I think I was like, that's who that is.
Wow.
Then go on to IMDb after and like, sure. I'm like, yep, nailed it.
IMDb is your friend.
It is.
At all times. I have my phone handy whenever I'm watching a movie. I have a hard time in the movie theater when I'm watching a movie, and I know that I need to go look this up, but I don't want, the light of the phone to be distracting anyone. But it's so hard because all I want to do is look up and find out where I've seen that actor or actress before, especially when they look super familiar. But that makes a lot of sense, and I can get that. Oh, wow. Yep. I loved Agnes. She was so great. Oh, but that's another story for another podcast that's not Run for Your Lives. So we'll just keep going.
All right. Yeah. Again, there's more characters to cover, which, again, how about Jack, which is, again, he's kind of built, Dennis Quaid is kind of built as the main character in this movie, and we're not even covering him until after Judith the Librarian.
We have our priorities here on Run for Your Lives. Judith the Librarian is important to us.
Yes, because, Jack's this main character, but I unfortunately wasn't really that interested in him, even though, he's the driving force behind everything because he's the one that's noticing the patterns. speaking to the president and the vice president and like trying to make things happen, and his not listened to. So he does play a very important role in this movie, and the whole thing of him against all odds, you know, packing up and going to New York to save his son is very important.
Yes.
But like it was very linear storytelling with not a lot of drama or heart to it. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, I mean, I get it. He's going to do that. The one thing I did really love was the creative parallel that you did see in him, where you see him at the beginning of the movie. He's kind of being painted as unreliable, you know, where he's supposed to pick up Sam to take him to the airport, and he barely makes it. He would have forgotten if Tom wouldn't have mentioned his son to him. And he's like, oh shit, I got to go get him from the, you know, get him to the airport.
Exactly.
And he just runs off. And so you see him as like, you know, does he show up for his son, kind of a deadbeat kind of thing. But then at the end of the movie, when he walks in to that room in the library where they're staying warm, and Sam has held on to hope this whole time, it's like, you made it. And he's like, of course I did. And there's this cool parallel of like, when it matters, he's there for his son. And I liked that a lot.
Exactly. I think that is a great statement, because right at the start, you know, Dennis Quaid is a big part of this movie. At least he's billed top billing.
Yeah.
And you see him at the beginning trying to save the data, and it looks like he could fall into the crevice or the big hole that's been created due to the shelf splitting. I wasn't nervous at all. I'm like, there's no way he's going to fall in there. He has the top billing.
Yeah.
But you could see that he was trying to save data that might save someone else. So I understood that. I understood his dedication to his work. But you're right. They did paint him as being unreliable. His family is used to him not being there. He's missed a million vacations.
Mm-hmm.
He almost missed taking his son to the airport.
Yeah.
You know, why would you rely on him to be there when he hasn't shown up in so many opportunities? And yet Sam did believe he was coming. He kept saying, my dad will come, my dad is coming. And I kept thinking, how do you think this when he has just not shown up?
Yeah.
So many times. And yet he did. And I agree with what you said. The parallel is just, it was great to see him show up when it matters. And you realize that he's focused on trying to help so many other people through his scientific research and work. Mm-hmm. But when he needs to save his family, he will.
Yeah.
When he needs to be there, when it's serious, he will be there. He just has, I think, a hard time trying to decide between his work and his family, because he knows the work that he's doing is so important to the world.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, his family. And I think he is used to prioritizing his work above his family.
Mm-hmm. I can totally see that. And you see that his relationship with his wife, or I guess it looks like they have been divorced, because they're in separate houses, and you know, they're talking about, you know, different things going, you know, checking in on his son through her. And so it seems like, you know, those problems have been something that he's always dealt with. And I think it led to a separation between him and his wife, between him and Lucy, where things were not working out because he always picked work over family commitments. And I really liked her, though. She's a great character in her own right. She has the most heart-warming, I guess, but just like emotional hitting storyline and arc in this movie for me. And, you know, she's a pediatric healthcare professional. I don't know. They didn't really state whether she's a doctor or a nurse. I don't know if her exact title was really given, but, you know, she's working at this pediatric hospital, and she has this bond with a certain patient named Peter. Seems to be like a cancer patient there, or some kind of leukemia or something. And his parents aren't really stated where they are.
They can't reach them. That's all we know, is that they're not able to reach
Can't reach them. And he kind of talks about his parents as if they're kind of distant anyway. And they don't go into that, which is kind of sad on its own. I don't know. But he's stuck there after they've been able to evacuate everybody. I guess his condition is serious enough that he can't be moved to another location without being hooked up to the machines and an ambulance would be able to afford. So, you know, a snowplow is there and everybody else is gone. She says, he won't survive that. He has to have an ambulance. And so she sends the other nurse or doctor away and says, you know, I'll stay with him. And oh, my heart just ached in that moment. But at the same time, before she even made that decision, I put myself in her shoes and I said, like, I would do exactly
The same
the
thing.
same thing. I was just like, you know, it put myself, because I work with, you know, kids with special needs, you know, a kid, but like, it's kind of that same thing as, you know, like kids who rely on your help and your care and your love. Like, it's an important thing. And so I put myself in that position. I was like, I'd do the same thing. I'd be like, you know, you go take care of yourself. You know, thank you. You called the ambulance people. You send a message to them. So hopefully they'll show up. But if not, it's like, looks like me and Peter over here are just going to hang out no matter what happens until the end.
Yep.
Like, so like, you know, I'll read to you over and over, little buddy. Don't worry about it. I'm here for you.
Yeah. That was so heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking,
Mm-hmm.
remember when I saw it the first time, I was thinking, oh my God, Jack's gonna go rescue Sam, but his mother's gonna die. Because I just couldn't imagine, like, I couldn't think about how it could be different. And just thinking about how selfless she was.
Yeah.
To put Peter first. When I'm not even sure his own family was putting him. I mean, I question that.
Yeah.
Like, I question that. And so for her to do that, and then for the guy, the ambulance driver, to come in and...
Oh, man. I was like, I can finally breathe again after that. I was like, okay, the kid's going to be fine. He's saved. I can breathe. I can relax and watch the rest of this movie now, because that's where my mind was hung up for a little bit. I was like, what about that kid?
It's funny. You know, it's funny what things will take place. Well, it will take in a movie for me to be like on the edge of my seat or not being able to breathe. And it is moments like that. It's maybe it's not, you know, what seems to be life and death, like these intense action-oriented life and death moments. It's these little quiet scenes.
Yeah.
That just affect me. And I'm just, you know, heart-wrenching thinking, oh my gosh, his mother's going to die. And oh my goodness, it's so selfless of her to stay and take care of her patient. And I have friends that are nurses that would do the same exact thing. I also have friends who aren't in the medical field that would give of themselves to save or protect someone else. And I think it's part of being a good human, putting someone else's needs before your own. And I think we definitely know and could tell that Lucy's heart was where it belonged, which was taking care of Peter.
Yeah, definitely.
Can definitely commend that.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about a group that I liked? Really, really. And that was Professor Rapson and his team in Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
Because I loved them. I liked that they were focused on the science, trying to do what they could. Professor Rapson started right at the beginning. I think they were in New Delhi, or they were, right at the beginning, wanted to meet with Jack because he had data that they couldn't synthesize. He wanted to talk about, you know, the situation because he understood it was real. He took it seriously when so many of the others were just worrying about the financial implications.
Yep.
And so I really enjoyed him a lot. And I liked his little group that he had, Simon and Dennis. So he had his little group. And they tried to keep things as light as possible. But there were just these moments, and we'll talk about it more in the quotes, because I have a couple of quotes from that group.
Yeah.
I felt so bad because I think it was Simon who said goodbye to his wife and daughter to send them off to visit her family, I think in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking, I hope they make it out of this, but I just had this sneaking suspicion, no, this is not good. They're not going to end up, I just felt bad. And in the end, I was sad that they didn't make it through. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like they're unsung heroes in this movie, because they're the ones who started sending some of the initial data to Jack to start to get information and determine what could help, you know, what trajectory things were on. And they were kind of, I feel like they were the unsung heroes. There wasn't a lot of attention on them, but you could tell when Jack had his last call with them that he knew. You know, as soon as he said, it's time for you guys to get out of there, and Professor Rapson said, the time for that has come and gone, my friend. And so you realize just how dire it was, and I felt so bad, because I really liked their dynamic as a team, and they talked about their families a little bit, although Terry was obsessed with soccer or football. guess, with football. Manchester United.
Yeah.
He was so focused on that. But I liked their dynamic as a trio. I thought that they were kind of cool.
It was really good. And I think they could tell they had a lot of faith in Jack Hall.
Yes.
To where they knew that their time was over. And what is it? Simon was saying, I just wish I could have been there to see my kid grow up. And Rapson was like, well, he'll grow up. Like, at least the good thing is they will grow up. Like, we may not be there, you may not be there, but I think they knew that they had done their part, and things were going to be okay for others because of their work.
They were very selfless, because I think they could have tried to get away. Professor Rapson could have tried to get them out of there sooner, but that would have meant not getting the data that Jack needed, and it was just too critical. And again, it's people taking their job seriously and giving of themselves and the ultimate sacrifice to help make sure that other people will be safe. And I think that's just incredible to think about that.
Definitely.
There was also this other trio, which was Jack, Frank, and Jason. And we meet them at the very beginning. They're up at...
Yeah, they're in Antarctica. Yeah.
Doing some research there, where we almost lose Jack. And it seemed like, according to what we saw, Frank and Jack had been together for quite a while as a duo, and Jason had only been there for like a couple of years together. Yeah,
so he was kind of the new guy. Because I loved at the very beginning, Frank walks into their little shack, their little like RV there, and Jack's like, "You left Jason?" He's like, You left Jason with the drill? I was like, "Oh, he can handle it." And then it starts cracking. I was like, Jason could not handle it. Which, just kidding. It's not his fault.
No.
It's humanity's fault.
Much bigger problem. Not Jason's fault for this one.
Yeah. No.
I thought they had a cool dynamic. I liked when they met, I think it was Janet, and she was asking questions and they were answering everything in unison. Like together, it was just kind of funny. It's like, yep, okay, they've heard these questions before, I guess.
Yeah. Is he always like this?
Yes.
Does he ever chill out? No, not really.
Super intense.
Yeah.
But we learn, I think, why he is so intense, because he knows how serious this is, and I think it's easy for people, even his own family, to want him to put aside some of the work he's doing, and yet he knows that he can't. Because it's too critical to human survival, the planet's survival. Yeah. We could just get more people to listen to him earlier on, we'd be doing well. Yep.
Jason and Frank both have problems that they come across, one much more than the other.
Yes.
But, R.I.P. Frank, unfortunately, we do lose him as they're dragging the sleds across the snow. They don't realize that they're walking on top of the mall. And the glass ceiling of the mall cracks underneath the weight of Frank and his sled. And all of them would have ended up sliding and falling to their death if Frank hadn't decided to sacrifice himself and cut his rope to send himself falling in order to relieve the stress on the glass to save the other two. And that says a lot about his character, too, there, for sure.
It does. Watching his sled crash on top of what looks like an escalator, and then seeing him slice his rope, it's like, oh, this, that he had a painful death. Yeah. It was not an easy death. But again, he did not want Jason or Jack trying to save him because the glass was cracking and they were going to probably end up down there too. And he may have ended up dead anyway because the way the rope was going. I mean, it was not a good situation.
Yeah.
Don't walk on top of glass-covered malls. Rule number 473.
Yeah. And then Jason, I wasn't exactly sure what happened to him. Was it just exhaustion where he passed out?
I think it was exhaustion. And then he ends up with getting a head injury because Jack had to throw him in.
Throw him into the building, yeah.
It looked like a Wendy's, but I'm not 100% sure. But it looked like, a fast food restaurant. So I think that they just threw him. He just threw him in. Yeah. And then they pushed him into the freezer and
It's better than him freezing in the air outside, so
Yeah, that was...
had to get him in quick.
He did. He didn't have a choice. And then he had to explain what happened, because he's like, oh, what? Yeah. It's like, you have a concussion, kind of, I think, and yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah. See, another character who, if we have a villain of the story, which, not a villain by being evil, but a villain by being stupid, we have Vice President Becker.
Oh,
and you know, he is that one that just pushes back at Jack for every step of the way until it is clearly too late. And it's, you know, you get those things, you know, tons of American refugees are now trying to cross the border into Mexico. It's like, how the turntables?
Yes. Yes. Completely different than what, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's just pushing back and back and back until, yeah, it's too late. And then I remember the moment where then the president, the president who seemed to be a great president, who really did care, and was able to step in, but it was just a little too late. And him and his motorcade don't make it on the way to Mexico, which then I remember that moment being like, wait, so they don't make it. I was like, that means Vice President Nutsack over here is now the president and is in charge. I was like, can he possibly? I was like, well, at this point, he can't really ignore things and screw things up more than it's already been. So
no, he can't, because he's already ignored it to that point.
He's done maximum damage at this point.
He's done maximum damage. And there's a couple of quotes once we get to the quote section that, he has a quote in my little group of quotes.
At the end of the movie, he has to go on and which I guess there's the fantasy of this movie is a president publicly apologizing and saying he was wrong about something.
Yeah. If it were that simple.
Right. Yeah. But I'm thinking it's like, okay, you can apologize all you want, but this guy better be impeached and replaced super quick, because you know, he still killed like half the country by not paying attention and not caring. They
were very lucky that as many survived that we could see did survive, because if he had just listened, you know, it's about listening. And you know, that takes me back to like everything in this movie and how it connects to the world today, and how sometimes we all need to learn to listen just a little bit better and not always be the ones talking.
Yeah. And even Tom calls him out on that, like in the boardroom in the White House, where, you know, they're talking about, well, how do we do this? And how do we deal with this? And Tom just finally is fed up with it. And he was like, well, we wouldn't have to be dealing with this if you would have listened and done something earlier.
That's right.
You know, just to where even the president sitting right there was like, yeah, you got a point. Like, you kind of screwed this one, didn't you?
Yes, you did. Just listening just a little bit sooner would have made all the difference in the world. Yeah. So disappointing.
And then, there were other survivors in New York City we saw at the end. I don't know how believable that is, but good for them. I'm glad that there were more.
It was great. It was great to see them. Like at the top, I think they were on tops of buildings. And that was
getting airlifted out and stuff, which was good. And then I guess the only other characters that I had any little note of, we only saw them for one scene, but the news crew in Los Angeles, R.I.P. Jeff, crushed by a bus in his Porsche, and R.I.P. Tommy, you got billboarded.
So sad. I mean, those are the characters that are kind of like auxiliary 1 or 2 scene characters, but you got to call them out. Yep. You have to call them out. You just do.
Well, anything else you've got to talk about?
I got some of my wonderful production notes that I can share.
All right. Before we do that, I think just one other part of the movie, one other little topic that we haven't talked about for some reason, is the wolves. And so I have them. There's not a lot to them. I was like, oh, they're gone from the enclosure. That totally won't become a problem later. Not at all.
No. Why would they show us if they weren't going to let it happen later? Come on.
Which, I know, like, the visual effects in this movie, we talk about visual effects a lot.
Yeah.
We're actually really, really good.
Oh, so
for the most part. Even like my DVD box at home literally says, the special effects are terrific, quoted by Roger Ebert. And so I was like, I'll be the judge of that when I watch this for the first time in 16 years. And it was mostly true, except for those wolves, which were actually pretty rough.
Yeah, those were rough. They were rough.
But we'll take it. We'll take what we can get, because it was still a cool scene.
Yeah.
Them being on the ship, looking, and they seem really aggressive, but that's because they're hunting, they're looking for food, they're starving, and these people are the only food source that they've been able to find, and so they're gonna get them.
Exactly. It's not like they can go in the kitchen and open a can of SpaghettiOs.
Yeah. And so that ends up being a really cool scene, which they end up having the raft, which is useful for carrying supplies, and even JD after he gets bit by one of the wolves, which...
Oh my god, he's gonna need the penicillin.
I was like, good thing they got the penicillin, because he needs it now too.
He's gonna need it. That's for sure.
But yeah. So not a whole lot to talk about with them, because it's really only one scene, but it's a fun scene, definitely. A lot of tension.
It is. There was a lot of tension in that scene, and I do agree with you on the CGI. I think they did such a great job in all the non-human or animal CGI that they did. But yeah, I think it was still kind of in its infancy too, CGI, as far as, I mean, we saw it in some of the other movies we've covered, but I think, yeah, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Those wolves. Nope, sorry. No green check mark.
Did not hold up as well.
Did not hold up as well. But remember, we've talked about this on a couple of prior episodes.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes those CGI elements, because things are always growing and changing, do not hold up. And while the other effects did hold up and still look pretty amazing, there's always going to be those one or two things that just don't.
When you're dealing with things that are supposed to be alive, and you're dealing with, like...
Absolutely.
Animals and people, CGI is a lot harder to make look good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Agree with that.
All right, so how about those production notes you mentioned?
Well, there were 416 visual effects shots in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
They used 9 effects houses, including our friends at Industrial Light and Magic, and over 1,000 artists. They had 13 block-size 3D model of Manhattan that was textured with over 50,000 photos. The storm surge scene needed as many as 3 special effects vendors for some of the shots. However, in 2008, Yahoo Movies listed it in the top 10 scientifically inaccurate films list. I also found out that they requested consultation by NASA, but NASA stated that the events in the movie were too ridiculous actually to occur and denied the request.
Oh, man. So they did not have the same backing as, like, Twister did.
No.
Where it was like, we'll make sure this is accurate. They're like, your premise already is way too off the wall, so we can't save this.
Exactly. I guess, too, NASA sent out a memo to all the employees saying that they were not allowed to comment on the likelihood of the events in the movie taking place. But I guess they rescinded the restriction later on. And the director, Roland Emmerich, confided that the Statue of Liberty would likely have been turned over by the force of the massive wave, but that he wanted to create a symbol of American values that stood up to the forces, so he kept it standing straight up. The river crossing scene that took place between the U.S. and Mexico actually took place at the U.S.-Mexico border, and the extras were really crossing the Rio Grande into Mexico.
Nice.
And finally, though paleoclimatologists and environmental activists were happy a film focused on climate change was being made, they were quick to point out the many scientific inaccuracies, and one even called it a great movie with lousy science.
Yeah. It's a great message.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so, climate change ignorers and deniers, like, okay, maybe it's not going to get this bad, this drastic, this fast, but, like, it's still going to be bad. Like, it's a good message of, like, it's the most extreme version of a warning of, like, what we could, be on a road towards.
Exactly. So take it seriously, folks. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think it covered pretty much everything I had there.
Wow. All right.
So we can get into some quotes then, if you've got some fun quotes.
Awesome. I do. I have a couple. They're not super happy ones. They're more the serious, which is where I usually go when it comes to quotes. Pake brings the funny, but I try to bring the more serious stuff. Although I do have one funny one, and I'll start with that because it's kind of... It's our good buddy Brian. when he was working on the radio at the library. And the security guard says to him, maybe you should have somebody help you with that, you know. And then Brian responds with, Sir, I am the president of the electronics club, the math club, and the chess club. Now, if there's a bigger nerd in here, please point them out. And then the security guard basically says, I'll just leave you alone to work on it then.
Yeah.
And so I found that kind of funny.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the funny moments. And so after Jack makes his presentation to the president and runs off because he's going to be going to Manhattan to rescue Sam, he leaves the room, and our good old Vice President Becker says, I don't accept that abandoning half of the country is necessary. And Tom says, maybe if you'd have listened to him sooner, it wouldn't be. And then Becker responds with, bullshit, it's easy for him to suggest this plan. He's safely here in Washington. And Tom follows up with, his son is in Manhattan. I thought you should know that before you start questioning his motives.
Yeah.
I loved that. To me, that was a mic drop moment.
Yep.
As soon as he said it, it's like, mic drop, leave the room, it's over. Because it's true. I mean,
yeah.
Becker was so quick to want to point fingers at everyone else at times. And it's like, you know what? If you just opened your ears a little bit earlier, we wouldn't have had all of the casualties that we had.
Yeah.
And then this is my sad one of the bunch. It's basically the final scene for our friends at the Headland Center in Scotland, and the last of the gasoline has been put in the generator, and Simon suggests that they use the scotch that's hidden behind some books, see if that might run the generator.
Mm-hmm.
And so Professor Rapson says, are you mad? That's a 12-year-old scotch. And then he pulls another book out, and it shows these 3 drinking glasses. Mm-hmm. And so Simon says in this toast, gentlemen, to England. And Professor Rapson says, to mankind. And then our good friend Dennis, who we know loves soccer, football, says to Manchester United. Mm-hmm. And that's the last time that we see that trio.
Yeah.
Sad.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you have, Pake?
All right. I had a few, but not a whole lot. It was another one of those kind of moments where I get so sucked into the movie sometimes that I don't even think about quotes. So most of it just kind of comes from early on, but I have a few. My one, kind of the other way where I had, I didn't have anything super funny. I guess the funniest one that I had is the librarian saying, you can't burn books. And then the other guy who's with her says, no, absolutely not. To where Sam just turns to her and says, you want to freeze to death? Almost with this smug look on his face, and then no response from them after that. They're like just right on board with it. I thought it was cool. We get another one from Sam that, earlier when they're on the plane and Brian is rattling off, he's like, the statistics for a plane going down is, 1 in 1 billion, or is it 1 million? But I think it's billion. And he's going, and Laura has to shut him down. Like, you're freaking him out. Stop. And then they're watching the news later on in the library, and in JD's house. And it's showing that, 2 planes had been brought down by turbulence before they had administered the no flight rules. And Sam just looks at Brian and says, so much for 1 in a billion.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. And then the last one was Jack Hall talking to the vice president. And it's after the vice president says to him that the economy is just as fragile as the environment and the climate there, to where Jack says, with all due respect, Mr. Vice President, the cost of doing nothing could be even higher.
Oh.
Which I was just like, ooh, Jack over here sounding like the incredible Miss Thunberg. just like, oh, get it, serve it up.
Yeah. Totally. I think that is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That quote is so powerful.
Yep.
I feel like we should be using it all the time now.
Definitely.
Yeah, it definitely captures everything. The cost of doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's far greater. It really is.
Definitely.
We all have to do our part.
All right. So, with that, I think we've gotten to the end of our podcast. But before we wrap it up, what is your overall ranking of The Day After Tomorrow?
Oh, goodness. It's funny because I would have given it higher before I watched it if I had ranked it.
Mm-hmm.
However, the science.
Yeah.
As much as I love the effects, the science. So because of the effects, I'm gonna give it a 7.
Okay.
Because of the effects, because I think the effects are amazing. I think they hold up, except for the wolves. They hold up real well.
Yeah, I think I landed kind of similar, except it actually went really close to, because Twister I think was a 7.6, and that's what I based this off of. It was like, okay, it falls between there and Dante's Peak. I was like, I liked it better than Dante's Peak, not as good as Twister. So I was like, do I find a place in the middle? But it actually leaned way more greater than the middle. I went with a 7.5 on it.
Ooh.
So it was right under there. I was like, not Twister levels, but close.
But close.
Just on how much I enjoyed it. And a lot of it is because of, other than the wolves.
The wolves.
But yeah, a lot of it is just like the visual effects, a lot of the, and even not even just the effects, but the visuals that it sets up and a lot of the really cool things that you get to see. And then a lot of the character moments had a lot of heart and impacted me a lot. So I do like that.
Yeah. And I feel like the character moments were better than what we got in Dante's Peak. Mm-hmm. For sure. Which I think I also gave it a 7. So I may have to rethink that. Because the character moments were better. So I might have to rethink my score.
All right, Daphne, now it is time to get to our feedback for this week.
Yes, I'm excited.
All right. Always love feedback, love hearing from you guys. This first one is a Facebook comment coming from our friend Damien.
Yes.
And he says, I was able to rewatch this, and I must say, I think it's a pretty good disaster movie. I enjoy Dennis Quaid in most of his movies, so that helps. The effects are well done, with my favorites being the instant freezing of helicopters and people, the huge wave crashing through New York, and the tornadoes ripping apart LA. Very sad that Dr. Rapson and his assistants in Scotland didn't make it. And Frank sacrificing himself so they all didn't crash through the mall ceiling was heartbreaking. Probably wouldn't have been as good a disaster movie if everyone survived. Didn't care for the vice president. I wouldn't vote for him next time around. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving.
I totally agree.
Thanks, Damien.
Thank you, Damien. It was so sad that they didn't make it. I remember the first time I watched it, it just struck me because I just really liked them. They were just a good little group of guys. And every time now that I rewatch it, it just takes me back to that sad place when those scenes come up and he's having that call, especially when he has the call with Jack and says the time has come and gone. And so there's no future for them. So sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Damien. Yeah, I did have a great Thanksgiving. I hope you did too. All right. And then we do have a voicemail from the one and only king of voicemails, Steve Brown.
Let's hear what Steve has to say.
Hey, Pake and Daphne, it's Steve. This is for the day after tomorrow. I had forgotten a lot about this movie. I only think I probably watched it once back in the day, but it's entertaining, and if I had to give it I'm not going to even try to give it a rating, maybe a 7. It's passing. The science, I read some of the IMDb comments, this is how absurd the science is. I think the only problem I have with this movie is it takes itself way too seriously. And it needs to, because it's so tragic of how many, when you try to fathom the numbers of how many people died, had to be millions, across the world or even more. What population is actually left of the world now. And the movie doesn't really make fun of itself. There's a couple of spots where you kind of see it starting to make fun of itself, and then it kind of doesn't. Like the scene when Dennis Quaid and the partner who survived were in there, and he said, "Well, I had to throw you in the hole, or I had to push you," and the guy's like, "Well, yeah, you're always pushing me." And then Dennis Quaid just kind of gives him this look. And then that line at the end where the astronaut's like, "Have you ever seen the air so clear?" So it's a little bit of it, that you go, okay. But it was a decent watch. Can't wait to hear what you guys are going to do next, and hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. Talk to you later.
Awesome. Thanks for your feedback. Always appreciate it. Whether you love a movie, hate a movie, or find yourself somewhere in the middle, that's awesome. We just love talking about movies.
We definitely do.
That's what it's about.
Definitely appreciate you guys sending in your feedback. I know it was a holiday week for some of you, so it means even more that you took a couple of minutes to send in some feedback on the movies we're covering.
Yeah. Of course. All right. What else is going on in the podcast universe? I always love doing a little shout outs. We have our usuals. Of course, on Strange Indeed, you can hear me and Rima talking about The Haunting of Bly Manor for now. As the time we're recording this, we only have one episode left. The penultimate episode is out for you to listen to, and the finale will be recorded this next week. And then we're done with Bly Manor, and I'm kind of sad because it's been a really fun ride. But also, I'm so ready to get to the end and talk about how everything ends and wraps it up and hear from everybody there, too. So
absolutely.
That'll be fun.
I've been going week to week with you guys, so it's been a longer watch, but it's also been a lot of fun, and I'm sad that it's going to be over, but I'm also looking forward to you guys breaking it down and sharing what you think about the end. Yeah.
And then we do, I don't know if Rima will be happy with me because she hasn't announced anything, so I won't say anything specific. But we do have a plan for an episode after the finale, the week after. And all I'll tell you is we're staying in the Mike Flanagan realm, and that'll be about it.
Ooh,
so
I look forward to that. He hasn't even told me, guys.
Yeah. And then, of course, you can hear Steve and our friend Mark over on Panels to Pixels. They're still covering The Boys Season 2, which, if you haven't watched that on Amazon Prime, go do that because it's incredible and crazy and gory and violent and irreverent and explicit and awesome in every way that it can be. I love it.
I don't know if there are any adjectives left after that.
And then speaking of Mark, you can hear him on his other podcast, Adrenaline Cinema, where they talk about all things action-packed movies. This week, Mark and special guest Ben are talking about the movie Con Air.
I loved that movie, and I loved the episode that Mark did with Ben where they broke down Die Hard. So
yes,
I'm really looking forward to listening to this one.
Mm-hmm. And then, as far as Run for Your Lives, what's coming up next in our little podcast world?
Ooh, well, if you can believe it or not, a new movie. So in our next episode, we're going to be breaking down this really cute, cool, fun, scary-ish movie called Love and Monsters. It was released on October 16th, 2020, and stars Dylan O'Brien, Jessica Henwick, and Michael Rooker. And it was directed by Michael Matthews. And honestly, it's one of my favorite episodes that we've done, because it was really, I think, the first new movie that we covered, and the excitement of being able to watch something fresh.
Yeah, because I think we did record it in advance.
Yes.
As we do some of our episodes. And so I think we ended up watching it and recording it the week after it came out on demand.
Yes.
And so we were right on it. And so we've been sitting on this. And so we're excited to release it and talk about something new.
Yes.
And I definitely recommend people go check that movie out and give us some thoughts and feedback on it if you do. Because it was a lot of fun for us.
Yes.
And
I loved it.
Speaking of that, if you want to send those thoughts and feedback, you can hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/runforyourlivespodcast. You can email us at runforyourlivespodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at RYFL Podcast and Instagram at runforyourlivespodcast. If you're enjoying the show, tell your friends, share the love. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Audible, or Amazon Podcast, Pandora, everywhere. We're on YouTube. Find us every place you can. If you need links to our socials or to any of those podcast players, just go to runforyourlivespodcast.com and all of it will be there. Send your friends. And while you and them are at it, go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, make us feel loved. We will appreciate it very much.
Yes, we will. And with that, Pake, we've reached the end of our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone, as always, for listening. I am Daphne.
And I'm Pake.
And if you have to run before you freeze to death, you better run for your lives.
Bye-bye.